Remember the 4th of November. Guys, it's Kevin here. I'm going to talk today about this November 4th event that we've seen so much talk about. We've seen the memes, we've seen the YouTube videos, and we've seen the flyers that are circulating around places like Berkeley and other college campuses. I actually have one right here, and I'm going to read it. And this is something that can be dangerous, guys, and I'll explain why after we read over this. But this was from the flyer found at Berkeley, and it actually says, "The nightmare must end. Millions feel this and ache with the question of how to stop this unrelenting horror. The state are nothing less than the future of humanity and the planet itself." I don't know what that means. I guess part of the page is cut off here. "On November 4th, 2017, we will gather in the streets and public squares of our cities and towns across this country. At first, many thousands declaring this whole regime is illegitimate and that we will not stop until our single demand is met." So what is their single demand? Well, it goes on. "The nightmare that must end. The Trump-Pence regime must go. Our protests must grow day after day, night after night. Thousands become hundreds of thousands, and then millions, determined to act to stop the great danger that the Trump-Pence regime poses to the world by demanding that this whole regime be removed from power." So there you go, guys. They want to remove the president from power and the vice president. But, you know, Mike Pence is very wonder bread. I don't know what he's done to trigger these leftists. We've seen what Trump has done to trigger the left, and it's hilarious. But Mike Pence is boring, guys. I don't know what they have against Pence. But anyway, let's talk about why this is dangerous. We've seen the people who are behind this. We've seen the left, how frenzied they are and panicked right now. The left, in a lot of ways, is losing power, and they're more dangerous because of that. But they've also become more frenzied, more triggered by the media, especially over the last couple of years now, where the media has aided in this and abetted by painting everybody who isn't a left-wing revolutionary communist or socialist as some sort of fascist. And whoever doesn't toe their cultural Marxist line and follow the agenda as a racist and bigot or neo-Nazi. And it's really divisive. And the Russian, I've talked about this before, the Russian propagandist Yuri Bezmenov spoke of the way that Leninists would take over America and revolutionary communists would take over the world. And he said they'd do it with propaganda in a four-stage approach. And that four-stage approach, as he listed it, was first the demoralization. That's something we've seen over the past 20, 30 years now. That started with the schools, all the constant attacks against what is considered middle class or Western culture, white culture. We see it with the racial attacks and all the conflict they've spread with that. And then the next phase after that was what they considered the destabilization phase. Well, that destabilization phase has happened over the past 8 to maybe 15 years, really ramped up over the past 2 or 3 years. And that's rioting, protests, constant class conflict, and constant racial conflict. And people divided more than ever, people left worse off because of it. And we saw a lot of that with Obama, and started there, and it's really grown since then. And they've sort of had some beta tests for what they're planning with this event, and in the means of the Women's March on Washington, and how they could grow these sort of activist movements. They've been working on this for a while. Then the next phase that Yuri Bezmenov talked about was the crisis phase. And that's what this is. This is the crisis, guys. This is what the left have been working up to. This is their magnum opus. And it can be something very, very bad for this country, or it could fizzle out. And that's something I'm going to go into. But if they do make it the way they want to, where they're going to have an event that mirrors what we've seen in Ukraine and in Egypt, and a lot of these other places where Marxists have used these techniques to destabilize and overthrow countries, Well, if it happens like that, then it moves into their final phase, which is after the conflict, is what they consider the resolution phase, or the end of revolution phase. And that's when they come in and say, hey, we can solve your problems, we can stop all this. And then they usually kill the people who started it, the leftist agitators, they're useful idiots, and they also kill us for opposing it. So that's something that's happened and played out in several countries now. And I want to talk about the parallels between that, because some of the people funding this event, and if you look at the people involved, there's the new SDS, that's Bill Ayers, who is a known terrorist, a left-wing terrorist, who was involved with SDS back in the 70s and then became the Weather Underground. He's involved with this. You have George Soros funding it, and his many organizations that he funds that are all sort of left-wing activist organizations, very globalist natured. Some of them are very revolutionary, and they're all involved in this too, in one way or another. If you follow the money, then you always see what things are really about. And when you follow the money, it leads right back to the same old cast of characters. So you guys can do research on that on your own. But I want to talk about another event that George Soros held, and how it mirrors this and why this is so dangerous. So back in Ukraine, when they had their revolution, the revolution was not just overnight. It's something that was built up over several years, but it really ramped up in about a 12 to 8 month period before the actual overthrowing of the president there. And what they did was they started with conflict between two parties, and George Soros actually funded both sides of this. He funded the Golden Dawn Party, or a faction of it, and they actually had a tiki march, which is really interesting when you talk about things like Charlottesville and people who say Jason Kessler was a plant. The tiki march there was very much like the tiki march in Ukraine. And if you go on Google and look at the photographs, they're exactly the same. Guys in black holding tiki torches and marching in the line 4 by 4 deep, or 4 wide, and hundreds deep. It was just like that, guys. And if you look at the Google pictures, you'll see how very eerie the similarities are. And so they used that event to really trigger the left wing in that country to fight with the right wing and get really frenzied up. And then they painted everybody that they wanted to take out as fascists or bigots, which is something that we see in America right now. And it doesn't have to be people on the right. It's just anybody who the elites, who the planners decide they don't want around or they don't like. They label them as a fascist or a bigot, and then they stick their left-wing attack dogs on them. And that's what we saw in Ukraine. So then when you look at this flyer and it talks about how they will make tens of thousands into hundreds of thousands, then millions, that's force multiplication. That's something else that happened in Ukraine. And it started in the square, in the big public square there in the capital city. And as that protest grew, agitators came in and they started fighting with the police and really frenzying people up and getting them riled up. And then other people who were paid would come in and bring these groups in, go out, find people, bring them in, and really they used that to grow the protest. And they made a bunch of art things and different sort of events within the protest to try to make people think it was fun. And then the agitators who would come in and stir things up would try to turn the just average people who came in to see what was going on, would try to turn them into radicals by turning them against the police and doing things to really agitate the situation. Well, that's what can happen here, guys. Now, there's a couple ways this can play out, and none of them are good, but there are definitely two major scenarios which we need to consider. One is that the left does not have the power they think they have, and this thing will fizzle out. And I'm willing to bet that's what's going to happen. We see the left is demoralized right now. We see a lot of these guys who were millennials and they're getting into their 30s now, and they're becoming red-pilled because they have kids, they're starting to pay taxes, they're starting to work now. And you know, once you start working and paying taxes and you sort of wake up to the lie and BS that you were taught in university, all this cultural Marxist propaganda, you wake up to the fact that everybody struggles and that everybody faces adversity. And you also realize that roads and schools are not socialism, and that, you know, that was a load of shit that they sold you to try to sell you on Marxism. And once you start paying half your salary in taxes, you realize that Marxism is not the greatest thing in the world. But anyway, so the left is losing power in that regard. And I think they do have ways to try to still stir things up. They can definitely use groups like Black Lives Matter, they've done in the past, and try to agitate them, especially with these events that are sort of coinciding with this, like the football protests. This is something that could definitely happen. The other scenario would be that they go in and they have a group the size of the groups we saw for the Women's March or something like that, and they start rioting and they start agitating, and people get fed up. And we're already seeing people start to get fed up, and in that case, the public will demand the police come in. And I think the police and the federal government under Trump, the FBI, the people who are sort of more, you know, centrists or right-wing and inside the government and law enforcement, are fed up with this, and they want to do their job, and they want to go out and crack some skulls at this point, because they're tired of seeing these people just break all of our laws and disrespect our country. And I don't want a police state, and that's what this could lead to. But I definitely think that, you know, the left could be exposed as the violent revolutionaries they are, and this could wake people up, the general public up, to the fact that communism is a revolutionary ideology and it needs conflict to survive. It is based off of conflict theory. And so it can wake up the country to the fact that these people are all about disrupting, causing chaos and conflict, and that they're not good for America. And hopefully, you know, something good will come of that. But as far as what we can do, I encourage everybody to go out and spread the word that this is going to happen. I think that some groups can go out and protest, but I would not recommend going out there in these major cities if there are large groups and lots of agitators, because it could be bad for you. You could get hurt. I would more recommend that teams stand by. People like Oath Keepers go out and have medical supplies ready to actually do some good out of this. I actually have a cleanup planned in case they come here and cause problems, because these leftists, as much as they talk about the environment, they love to litter. And so, and they're totally irresponsible and hypocritical when it comes to that. So my thing was to plan a cleanup afterwards. Now, if things turn bad and they start some civil unrest, then obviously we'll clean up the streets in another way. But, you know, if that doesn't happen, if it fizzles out like I think it will, then, you know, it could be the death throes of the left in this country. And that could be a good thing that comes out of this. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. I want you guys to know where this comes from, and I hope you'll share this video, like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to put more videos out like this. I haven't done YouTube much before, but I think I'm going to start doing it. And as I grow, I'll get better equipment and all that. But thanks, guys.